You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 353 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. And I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin and he's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
It's rainy but celebratory.
It is a 3-3 week for the Cubs. We will get into the week that was for them, preview the week that will be as we head into our All-Star break, the Cubs All-Star break after the next week. And to help us break down all things Cubs, longtime friend of the show, you know him from all of his writings at at a bunch of places. I'll let him tell you all the places to find him, but you know him from his appearances on the show plenty of times as well. Matt Clapp. Matt, thanks for taking time out to talk Cubs with us tonight.
Thank you very much for having me again.
It's always great, and let's get right into it here. This 4th of July weekend, and the Cubs. I was a pessimist going into this week, and I felt it to be a 2-4 week. Here it was 3-3, as you successfully predicted, Pat. The Angels turns out real bad. They you and I went to the game on Friday. Before we get to the Angel series, anything, I'll let you lead it off, Pat. Anything you want to touch on with that Phillies series? It was tough to watch those losses there.
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit of the ghost of Christmas could have been, right? Like all these Cubs and former Cubs and should have been Cubs all playing on the Phillies and some of them injured. I mean, to the fact that, Noel wasn't pitching and Harper was out and Schwarber was out and they kind of cleaned our clocks for the most part. I mean, it was depressing in that regard, but the Cubs took 1 out of 3, which frankly, if you want to be honest with yourselves, Phillies are a good team. They're one of the best teams in baseball and the Cubs are not. So it shouldn't be surprising. It's just wistfully, I was hoping some of those guys were on our team.
Yeah, Matt, watching that, Pat and I were texting during those games that so many things would have been different if Bryce Harper ended up being a Cub.
Yeah, I mean, that series showed off, I think, really, really well even without Harper and without Schwarber, like Trey Turner launching a couple big dingers and, you've seen it all year with Bryce Harper and like outside of their top couple of guys, the other guys' offensive numbers aren't that much different than like Michael Busch, Ian Happ, Seiya Suzuki, etc. But it just shows like what superstar power can do for a team, and having a Bryce Harper and Trey Turner kind of player in your lineup and your position player side at all times, like that's just a big rock that you can lean on, and it's transformative, and that's what the Cubs need to really, really try to find eventually and be aggressive, hopefully, to do so.
Yeah, Matt, when you watch a Phillies team and you look at the lineup they had and you do take into account, imagine if the Cubs had like a Harper, a Schwarber, and a Real Muto, right? 3 basically all-stars, not in the lineup. 3 out of your 8 position players, your 9 hitters out of the lineup, a 30-year lineup out. I'm trying to think. The Cubs hitters don't have the same ceilings, but imagine if Suzuki and Happ and Busch were all out of the lineup.
Right.
We would be lucky to score a run, probably.
Yes.
Right. In any game.
Yeah, and I mean the bottom of the lineup has just been a black hole. Miguel Amaya finally got a couple of hits in today's game Sunday. Ground balls, not exactly crushed. And PCA is. We know his bat's probably not going to be a thing initially, hopefully eventually, but you're at least getting a great defense, and the developmental part of that is a big deal. But you can't have, it's Nick Madrigal, Miles Mastrobuoni. They've always had a couple of hitters down there at the bottom, 2 to 3 at the bottom. And that's before you get to Dansby Swanson not really hitting for the last like 2 weeks, and he really had a maybe 3 or 4 week stretch where he finally started hitting like you kind of expect, and then the rest of it's been rough. So I mean, you're talking.
When you say he hasn't hit in 2 weeks, you literally mean he didn't have a hit for 2
Yes,
weeks.
yes.
Not just that he wasn't hitting well, it's just he wasn't hitting at all.
Yeah, I think he broke like an 0 for 23
Yeah.
Stretch with a single in this game. So I mean, when you're talking at least 3 guys like that, that's immediately 33% of your lineup, or 1 out of every batter an inning, 1 out one out of every 3 outs in an inning. And that's again without like a legitimate superstar. So that that all starts to add up after a while. And then I mean, on the margins, they haven't had like a reliable bench bat really all season. Patrick Wisdom fell off really hard. Nick Madrigal was bad the whole time. Miles Mastrobuoni's made some nice like 26th man plays lately, but he's not like a bat you want to count on. So they haven't really even had anybody who can like pinch hit or bring in late in a game or anything. It's just those same like 4 or 5 guys. So it's really tough that way.
Yeah, early in this game, Mastroboni's up, and there's a chance that a base hit could make a real difference in the Sunday game. And I was texting with my friend who was like, it's too early to bring in someone else to pinch hit, but man, I wish someone that wasn't Mastroboni was up there, and I'm like, who would pinch hit? And I'm like,
it would be like a David Bodie kind of guy or something,
right?
That's like all
everybody's bad.
Yeah. So that definitely adds up a lot, and it's really annoying too when they have this good farm depth and stuff, but they haven't really gotten any impact yet there in terms of like filling out the bottom of the roster. And some of that's like a developmental thing, probably with like Canario or guys like that, but they've got to start. They're the kind of team that can't really afford to not be at least decent there, especially when you're playing all these 1-run games and every single roster spot can be a big thing.
Well, and especially when it seems as if holding on to roster spots for Madrigal and Mastroboni and players like that force the Cubs to take people off the 40-man roster who now are doing well with other teams, Jeremy Estrada and others, and it's like, wow. It shows sort of a general rudderless kind of focus, I guess. Right now, you're holding on to some guys who are veterans and have proven themselves to be barely playable on a roster, and then you've got the great farm system, but nobody's actually ready to play. So
Right.
It's they're kind of in a weird spot. And the one guy who kind of did come up and play well, and we had a lot of high hopes for this year, was Christopher Morel, who as of today was hitting still under 200 and hit an OPS plus of 88. I hear he's doing better than that, but I watch the games and there's this argument that, well, he hits the ball hard, so therefore it's okay. Some would argue that he hits the ball hard, but he always hits it right at the way he hits the ball hard is not helpful. I don't even know what to say. I know his defense is poor, but what's your overall take on him and his ability, his future with this organization?
Yeah, so I really like the walk and strikeout improvements he's made and all that stuff, and he's the batted ball stuff all looks pretty good, but we're in July now, and you got to start having the results by this point. I mean, the numbers are what they are when you're this late in the season. So, I mean, there's got to be some sort of adjustment made. I feel like he's hit a lot of warning track fly balls. I don't know if that's something in what he's doing, or if the ball's like been dejuiced and all that stuff, because offense is pretty down across the league. But I mean, he's got to eventually start hitting. Like if he had his walk and strikeout improvements to go with what he had done the last couple of years, that's all of a sudden a really exciting hitter. But I mean, again, you got to have it when you're talking July. The results got to start being there soon. So I don't even really know how to project him going forward or what you do with him, because you've got all of these DH kind of corner bats that they're not really good at a position, that are coming up too, with like Ballesteros and Casey and Triantos and Shaw.
Suzuki's giving him a run for his money as a DH,
yes,
right?
Exactly. I mean, yeah, it's very possible that Morel's a better third baseman than say as a right fielder. I don't know about that, but I mean, you could at least make that argument, and it's probably getting close to that territory. So that's the whole point. Is And we also didn't know that Michael Busch was going to be a solid first baseman. So you've got all these guys that don't really have a for sure position, and plus Bellinger and PCA trying to get all these guys in the lineup. So, I mean, Chris is going to have to start hitting probably in order to be a long-term part of this.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, there are guys in the minors who they want to give a chance to. Like Canario is another example of somebody who could probably come up at some point later this season, I would imagine, especially if they lose some players at the trade deadline. And to your point about Morel's walk and strikeout rate, I think it's shown great improvement. And if you told me that's what his walk and strikeout rate would be, I'd say, well, he's hitting like 245 at least, right? Because that's what you would normally see with that. If you told me, but he's still hitting in the 190s, I'd be like, oh, come on, that can't possibly be the case. But yet here we are.
Right. And again, it's July, so you got to, I mean, eventually the numbers are the numbers.
Yeah.
You mentioned Michael Busch, who is putting up some great numbers, hit a home run today on the Sunday we're recording this. 26-game on-base streak for Michael Busch, crushing lefties as well. Love to see that. Is Michael Busch a Rookie of the Year candidate for you?
I mean, he should be. I think he's every bit as deserving as like Shota is at this point. I have a feeling that Paul Skeens will probably be the guy that, gets the most attention and probably starts running away with it, as the season goes on. But, Michael Busch is absolutely part of the conversation. And I mean, he's a deserving all-star in my opinion right now. Like he won't be on the team, but he's had that kind of season so far. And I mean, I brought it up. His first base defense, I think, has been the particularly surprising thing. It's been, good.
He got better fast too, because he started off the season a little shaky.
Yeah, I mean, he couldn't scoop like any.
And in fairness, he wasn't a first baseman, so I mean,
right,
And he did have Morel throwing at him.
Yes, exactly.
We were pretending that he was a first baseman, but in reality, he was a second baseman. So he's adjusted to the position. Right,
and I've just been so impressed with his plate approach all season. He's the same guy at all times. He's going to have his strikeouts, he's going to have his whiffs, but he controls the strike zone, and he looks for pitches that, they call it selective aggressiveness, like what they preach, and that's like exactly what he does. He'll take his walks, and he'll try to pummel the ball when it's in his spot in his zone. So you can live with the strikeouts when you're doing those things well. Hopefully, eventually, he's K'ing in the 28-29% range, ideally even lower. But you can live with him being over 30 when he's hitting for a lot of power, getting on base a lot. And I mean, he's been a 2-WAR player already. Like if you told me before the season, if you told me like, this far into July that Michael Busch would have these numbers, I would think the Cubs were like 20 games over 500. I mean,
sure.
He was one of the big wild cards, just like Morel or just like a Matt Mervis or something. We didn't know they were going to get contributions from. And it's kind of even sadder that he's been so good and the team has been so bad with that. But he's definitely exciting, going forward.
If I told you he was going to be a 2-WAR player at this point of the season, but Swanson and Horner would both be less than 1, it might have been giving you a window into where we are.
Yes.
But, in 300 plate appearances now with the Cubs, which is, I look at that as like half a season's worth of at-bats. If he were to play every day and, as an established player, he was, remember early in the year, he was sharing time a little bit too, more than he is now. He's got 27 base hits, 12 of which are home runs now after today.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, that's a positive sign for the future. A guy, if he's putting up over 50 extra base hits a year, I think that's kind of what you're asking for. He only has 32 runs batted in, but I think that's more of an indictment on the rest of the lineup than it is on his abilities, frankly. It's almost amazing how few runs he can drive in because of how few people are on base.
Yes.
One of the other pieces of news this week was the call-up of Hunter Biggie called up. Looking forward to seeing him just based on the numbers that the prospect guys are sending around. Matt, what are we? Is this a lot of excitement here warranted? Is this someone who could stick around, or is he just going to come up and head back to Double A?
I think he has really, really high upside. This is a guy that he showed well in spring training. He has a fastball that'll touch 100. He's got a really, really nasty mix of pitches. And with Iowa recently, he's been closing it down in the ninth inning, and he just keeps growing and growing and growing. This is a guy that's really, really smart. He went to Harvard. He was actually a two-way player there, a good hitter. And he's made this long climb to the major leagues. And I honestly, like, he might be their highest upside guy down in the minors right now. I definitely liked him as much as like Estrada and Palencia, and hopefully he's one that finally gets it all to click for them rather than like with the Padres or something.
Yeah, I mean, we've been frustrated now for like half a decade with the Cubs' inability to bring up minor league relief pitchers who throw hard, right?
Right.
You play the Reds, for God's sake, or you play like the Pirates, and they've got like three guys all throwing like 98, 99, whatever, 100.
Yes.
And you're like, where are our guys doing that? And you look back and you're like, I'm not counting Dylan Maples because the balls were going in odd places, like the backstop mostly. I'm not counting Braylon Marquez because he can only throw the ball like 12 times a year. So 12 pitches a year wasn't going to do it. And I'm not even counting. Remember when they brought up, was it Rodriguez? And we were kind of excited. He had
Manny Rodriguez,
Manny Rodriguez, Emrod, and he closed a couple games out for him. But it turns out that most of the fast pitches he threw were Farnsworth-like, and they ended up going very far when the batters hit them. So that was problematic. But it's really been amazing, just sort of the lack of velocity. And I think it's something the Cubs have talked about, they've been working on, but it's really taken a long time to come to fruition. So we are very hopeful that, Biggie could at least, and think how fast he'll look coming in for relief for like a Kyle Hendricks or something. It'll feel like he's throwing 150. So knock on wood.
Yeah, and I think that they got to give chances to. We saw in this game Porter Hodge and Luke Little got late innings.
Right.
Little was finally pulled with 2 outs in the ninth when the bases were loaded. But Counsell gave him a pretty good leash there, and then I think you got to see those guys, and Palencia will probably come back up soon. Biggie, Ethan Roberts is back, and he hasn't allowed a run yet. Like, I think that's a really, really big part of the rest of the season, no matter how it goes, is you have to enter next season, knowing which guys you think have a pretty good chance of being part of your 2025 plus bullpen. And you were just saying it. You got to develop arms like this. And these guys are going to other teams and figuring it out eventually in some cases. And these are all like high upside relievers. And you got to find a reliever or two like this to be part of the team going forward. And I actually think they have a few really interesting options there. And hopefully Biggie's one of them.
And I am all for if Jed can find some reclamation project like with David Robertson or any of these other guys that come up, and Andrew Chafin, whatever, who they can pick up for cheap for a year or whatever at a time. But I just think the days of relying on getting 4 or 5 of those guys to fill out your bullpen every year hopefully should be behind you. Like, if you're a healthy organization, you should have 4 or 5 guys from your own minor league system who are cheap and who can perform those functions for you. And then maybe take a chance on 1 or 2 guys, knowing that if they don't turn out, it's not going to be the end of your bullpen like it has been for the Cubs the last 2 years, where, Fulmer didn't work out. Okay, I guess we're sunk. Like, it's like that can't be the strategy, I think, now that they're allegedly trying to compete, right?
Right, and that's extra money they're having to spend and to sign guys like that. That's, you could get like maybe a star level player with all those extra dollars you're throwing at Hector Neris kind of guys.
4 million here, 5 million there, 9 million here, and then we add it all up, and you're like, we could have spent $2 million on a homegrown bullpen with one closer who we're paying $15 million to, and probably in better shape.
Exactly, and when you're not spending that much money on it, then at the trade deadline, you can be like, we can afford to try to get this guy or get an elite reliever. And I mean, all the good teams develop their guys, and the Cubs have to do that. And I finally do like a lot of these young arms, so we'll see.
All right, Matt, last question from me, and then we'll let you go. We appreciate you coming on here on a Sunday to take time out with us. But looking ahead to the week that will be 7 games, 3 in Baltimore, 4 against St. Louis. Does this week matter to the Cubs front office for what they're going to do? Or do you think they've already decided, as we speculate, that they're either standing pat or are already looking at selling? I don't think that adding is a real option at this point. I wanted to get your thoughts on where the Cubs are at this point of the season heading into the All-Star break.
Yeah, so I think that if they happen to do really, really well, as in like go 5-2 or better, that might naturally potentially change their mind a little bit if they're moving up the standings. But for one, I don't feel great about this road trip.
No,
like if you told me right now, I would say probably 2-5, and I would also worry it could be worse. But maybe they get a couple more wins. We'll see. But I'm sure they're kind of leaning a certain way. I think selling the probably Nearest and Mark Leiter, Mike Talkman kind of guys. If these guys are healthy, and
Drew Smiley, anybody?
Drew Smiley actually may interest some teams just because he's left-handed and can give some innings and not be terrible. That's basically like as good as they're selling right now on paper. But are they going to dip into trying to trade any of the outfielders or anything? I don't know, because it could just be a hard match in terms of money and
they all have no trade clauses.
No trade clauses, and you might not get anything back in prospects. So there's so many unknowns to that. But generally speaking, yeah, I think they're probably leaning towards selling. Barring a great week, I could see them buying on the cost-controlled side. But again, that's not the kind of thing that you can sit here and assume is out there. But they should be on the lookout for long-term bats and this and that, no matter what. The other thing, though, is if you don't know if Jed Hoyer's job is locked in, do you want him making massive decisions? Like should he be given the keys to doing that? So we don't know that. If it's known that he's safe, he can do whatever he wants, I guess, because he's going to be the guy. If his job is not safe and he makes massive decisions, I would rather the next person in charge potentially does that in the winter. But to build the roster how they want to. But again, I don't know what that situation is. It really feels up in the air to me at this point. But they have to start winning games and soon, and they've been really bad on the road in general. That's part of the issue here. I believe they're 4 or 5 games over at home, something like that. So they've actually looked kind of like you would expect at home, but they've been a really, really bad team on the road, and especially over the last couple of months. So I'm not going to sit here and assume that they go into Baltimore and beat the Orioles, or even go into St. Louis and split there. We'll see. I would like them to, but yeah.
17-28 on the road for the Chicago Cubs. 25-21 at home.
That sounds right. And there may not be a tougher series than at Baltimore. I mean, that lineup is stacked.
That lineup is stacked, but it'll be really interesting because I think it'll be a true test of where the Cubs stand in terms of the rotation that Jed has built, right? So the 3 Cubs starters lined up for this series are Imanaga, Teon, and Steele, right? Mm-hmm. Those are the big 3. Admittedly. I mean, Assad is injured, but really those are if the Cubs were to make a playoff run and a wild card run, those would be the 3 guys who would want to pitch in those games, those big games. Those are our studs. If they get wiped out by the Orioles, I think that tells you everything you need to know about where we're at. If, on the other hand, and I think it's quite plausible that they actually pitch well, the Cubs may not win all the games. They may not score runs we may not score runs. Bullpen may collapse. The fielding may fail us. But I'm really curious to see how they match up against that stacked lineup, because that would be sort of a measuring stick to me of how plausible this is moving forward, not just for this season, but maybe for next year too.
Yeah, and it's especially a big challenge for Shota because he's had trouble with the home run ball, and I mean that team is going to get the ball in the air and probably crush them a few times. So, can you throw 6 innings, under 3 runs, etc.? Like, it's tough. Steele's stuff probably plays more to just about any opponent he faces, I feel like. Don't probably just jinxed him, but, we'll see. And Tyon has been so good, but I fear he's going to have some regression,
Yeah, he's good, except he gives up so many hits and so many
Right.
base runners. You're
Right.
always like teetering on the edge with him.
Right.
On the other hand, that Cardinal series, which might actually be more important to the Cubs, buy sell plans for the future, since the Cardinals are currently the team the Cubs need to pass to make the playoffs. It just, to put things in perspective for people, there are 3 wild cards. The Cubs are currently 10th in the wild card race, meaning there are 7 teams ahead of them for that final spot. The Cardinals being the best of the group, I think, at 6 games above the Cubs. 6 games isn't a lot, but when you have to pass every other team in between, and we saw this week, a 3-3 homestand doesn't get you anywhere because everybody else went 3-3 also. So it's like there's some level of status that's set in, and there's only 71 games left. So every time another week goes by and you don't pick up ground on 7 teams, the math starts to work against you.
Well, literally every other team went 5-5 except for Pittsburgh, who went 4-6.
Yeah.
And
so
Washington went 4-6. All the other teams in front of you went 5-5.
So nothing's changing, but that Cardinal series, which is a 4-game series, thanks to the doubleheader from the rainout, which was that the one where Imanaga was didn't pitch, and then they ended up not using him for a week or a week and a half.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, so that worked out great. But I would say that 4-game stretch could be a real disaster for the Cubs when you look at as good as the pitching is for the first 3 games of the week. Check out the pitchers for that series. It's going to be Wisniewski, who pitched well today, but again, against a weaker team. I think he'll have his challenges. Is Hendricks alive? If so, can he stand? Can he walk? If he can, then he gets to pitch one of the games. We're going to see it's a double Tayon week, so we get to one game or the other. He'll probably pitch well, and the other one maybe not. And then there's a mystery starter, for the 4th game because of the doubleheader. But given the injuries the Cubs have sustained and the lack of depth, both starting and relief pitching for them right now, currently on the 40-man roster, I could see that series. If the Cubs were to split those 4 games 2-2, I'd consider that not just a Pyrrhic victory, but like an actual victory for the Cubs. Unfortunately, it doesn't get them any closer to the playoffs, and 4 more games get wiped off the calendar. So, realistically, as you're careening into the trading deadline 2 weeks later, it's a kind of series where, although it's probably not plausible, winning 3 out of 4 is the only way you can actually start making a statement that, maybe we do have a chance to catch a team. And of course, going 2-2, they probably will end up losing the tiebreaker to the Cardinals like everybody else above them. So there's just a lot of things working against them,
Yeah, that's a big thing. Like you said, they're losing the tiebreaker to almost everybody. Last I checked,
because the better teams beat us.
Yes, exactly.
Even the slightly above average teams beat us, or the slightly below average teams beat us, apparently.
Right. So if you say there's 6 games, I haven't even checked the standings in like a week, but you say they're like 6 games out or whatever, that turns into 7 basically. And I mean, like Pat was saying, if you don't take at least 3 there, I mean, going 2-2 and knocking 4 games off the schedule is going to like lower your odds by a few percent at this point. You know what I mean? Like that's a loss in the grand scheme of things, unfortunately.
Yeah, at the end of the week, in April, it's fine.
But,
you have 64 games left to play at the end of the week, right? Right now, you have 71.
And you didn't gain any ground on the team.
It's 10% of the season. 10% of the remaining season is played this next week.
Right. So yeah, I mean they probably got to go like 4-3, 5-2 to really change the math, I think. Which nobody can sit here and say they expect that.
Matt, thanks for coming on. Always great to have you on. Please remind our listeners where they can find your work on the internet.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at the blog finds for Cubs baseball stuff. And then I also am an editor, writer, social media stuff at Awful Announcing and The Comeback.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Matt.
All right, we got Matt's prediction. He says 2-5 this week. Where are you this week? Because I'm
Well,
feeling 2-5. I think I agree with Matt.
yeah, see, I'm an optimist. I think the Cubs will go 3-4 because if there's anything this team has taught me is that they're never going to do enough to make us feel like we're in the race, and they're never going to do enough to make me feel like we're completely out of it. They're just going to, they're basically gravity will end up being our enemy because we'll just run out of games. But the team itself will stay middling the whole time.
All right, and yeah, we mentioned that we were at the game on Friday. We got to see Justin Steele pitch a tremendous game against
What
a
a great
terrible
game.
Anaheim team. Yeah, and we were in the Catalina Club enjoying the game, and unfortunately, the game was 2 hours and 7 minutes. It flew by. We were out of there too soon.
Yeah, we didn't get a chance to get that third hot dog, which would have been nice. No, it was a beautiful day, and the Friday game that we're at is the reason why you talk about Wrigley Field and you talk about the experience there. It was just a beautiful day. The weather was perfect. It was packed. The house was packed.
Yeah.
They said there were only like 37,800 or something, but it was, you look around, every seat was filled in that place. It was a good day. There was a lot of excitement. Steele pitched really well. It just felt like it almost was a flashback to the old days when the Cubs were actually good, like the late, teens. It felt like a 2018-19 game to me, rather than a game from the 2020s. It was a Theo Epstein era game.
Absolutely.
And just like that, with the snap of a finger, my wife went for a birthday party with a friend of hers to a rooftop the following day and watched the Cubs get 3 hits, and it was just a complete disaster. So it's up and down. But today I noticed on the television, while the Cubs again played a fairly good game overall, it did seem like, and I don't know if it was just people who just didn't show up, but I know it's a Sunday. You would have thought Sunday of 4th of July weekend, more people would have been there. The paid attendance was 34,000, but there are a lot of empty seats down the right field line. If I were Cubs ownership, I'd be a little concerned that those people weren't buying concessions and coming to my games.
Yeah, it was the opposite on Sunday as it was on the Friday description. So the Friday we said it was 36 and 38, and it felt like more. Here we're watching the broadcast. My friend was at the ballpark, and the ticket market was very soft for this game. You could get in for incredibly reasonable prices, and not enough people did. It was a lot of empty seats, like you mentioned, down the line. So yeah, real surprising for a Sunday game. But this Sunday, yeah, you mentioned it in our text that we need to keep an eye on these Sunday games and how that ticket market is softening up, and that could be a real concern. That's the kind of thing. Yeah, when the ballpark is full and the Cubs are bad, I don't think Tom Ricketts is that concerned. If the ballpark starts to thin out, and right now we're seeing it on a Sunday and we're seeing it here and there during a week against a bad team. But in September, when a Bears team starts that has a lot of excitement behind it, and the Cubs are past August and are not in it, and it could get real dire for the Cubs real fast.
I remember back in 2021 when the Cubs had the slaughter at the trade deadline and got rid of all their players that anyone knew. And then we went into August and September. There were certainly some games where I would send out pictures or tweet pictures where the stadium, I mean, the bleachers were half empty. The seats were like 2/3 empty for night games, and a beautiful weather, but still it was August, September. Even some weekend games, and I really do feel like that may have contributed to the Cubs, even though because they were in that weird state where they were retooling or whatever they claimed they were doing.
They were not rebuilding,
but they signed Suzuki and Stroman, and so they did add a couple players, despite the fact that they weren't actually trying to win. They were just trying to, and I feel like that was trying to fill some seats, that kind of those kinds of moves, And so, I mean, if that's what it takes to get them to spend a little bit of money, or take some chances, maybe for a star player. I mean, a lot of people like star players. I remember that place used to get pretty full when they had a star who played right field for him for a decade.
And we will talk about some of the stars of that were playing 40 years ago as part of 1984. We'll get there shortly as part of our 1984 recap. But yeah, let's put a bow on this week here. Yeah, it's we talked about Biggie getting called up. I think the only other piece of news is the reason he's called up. Colton Brewer is on the 60-day IL. He fractured his hand after pitching just 2/3 of an inning on that Saturday game. He got charged with 3 earned runs. I saw a tweet from at aisle 424 about the news. He said, the most damage to happen to a Brewer at Wrigley all year, probably.
Ouch. I will go a step further, and I will make a prediction that Brewer, this particular Brewer, never plays another game for the Cubs.
I mean, I could see that. Yeah,
he is 31 years old and was having a rough season as it was, and this is the kind of stuff that you might see out of a 23-year-old. But I'm sorry, you're 31. Like,
yes,
get a hold of your emotions.
Especially in a season like this, right? Like,
right. Yeah. Like yesterday, like his performance yesterday was going to change anything,
right?
In the game. It wasn't.
I was more upset about the Kyle Hendricks performance. There's nobody rooting for Kyle Hendricks more than this podcast. We wanted, you really hoped he could have done something, maybe had a little bit of interest to go somewhere and be a contributor down the stretch of a contender potentially, just to.
It was a rough start for him, but apparently, he said he had low back pain, and it was very painful for him to stand, but he could throw. It was less painful to actually throw. That's usually not a position where you want to put somebody out on the mound, though, frankly. If standing hurts.
This is on brand for the Cubs medical staff, though.
Yeah, I don't know. But I mean, they probably figured they didn't have any other choice. What were they going to do? Have Brewer pitch start the game? I mean, there aren't a whole lot of starting pitching options left these days for the Cubs. So, but you're right. I would like Kyle Hendricks to either go out with some dignity here and have some good games at Wrigley, or catch on with somebody who maybe could use a fifth starter who has playoff experience, et cetera, et cetera.
All right. And with that, we will now turn to our favorite segment, and that's our recap of the 1984 Chicago Cubs. This week in 1984, 40 years ago, we're celebrating the 1984 Cubs playoff team by looking at their performance, what happened this day in 1984 histories. Pat, I'll throw it to you. What happened this week in 1984?
It was a good week. Cubs went 5-2. Rick Sutcliffe, had now firmly taken over his spot in the rotation, is quickly becoming the ace of the rotation. He won both games he pitched deep into the games. Trout was pitching well. Sanderson, you're starting to Eckersley, you're starting to see the formation of the team. Durham is at first base now. You've got guys kind of fitting into their roles, I think, now finally. And this was a particularly interesting week. There wasn't a whole lot to say about the week, from what I could tell, other than that this was the continuation of the dreaded West Coast road trip. So back in the old days, we had the National League East and the National League West. The National League West consisted of Los Angeles Dodgers, San Diego Padres, San Francisco Giants, and of course, because it was the West, Cincinnati Reds and Atlanta Braves. I don't make this. I don't make the rules here. I just report on them, right? And so the Cubs every year had to go on a West Coast road trip, and these were brutal road trips. Typically, the Cubs would inevitably, really suck. They had to go out to the West Coast, I think, twice a year back in those days, and so they would do 2 of these trips every year. And every year they would come back battered and beaten, having gotten absolutely crushed, whether it was the time shift or whatever it was, playing good teams, they would always lose. So this was a particularly bad trip. because the Cubs start off with 4 games against the Dodgers, then 3 at San Diego, and then 4 at San Francisco. So it was an 11-game stretch.
That's a long stretch.
It is a long stretch, especially in those days. Pre-internet, they had nothing to do after the game. They couldn't go on their phones. They had no phones. All they could do is go out and cause trouble, which is probably what they were doing. And they had won 3 out of 4 from the Dodgers to start off the stretch. They beat Fernando Valenzuela. All was good, and so it got off to a good start. And then in this last week that we are reporting on, the Cubs played 3 games. First against the San Diego Padres, where the Cubs took 2 out of 3. Mind you, at the time we didn't realize the significance of playing the Padres, but it was, as it turns out, fateful. Most notably, by beating the Padres 2 out of 3, the Cubs retook possession of first place. They hadn't been in first place since the middle of June. They'd gone into a little bit of a June swoon. So now on the road, in 7 games into this road trip, the Cubs had regained first place, and Rick Sutcliffe beat future Cub enemy Eric Show. You might remember him. He's the one who intentionally threw a baseball at Andre Dawson's face after Dawson had a very successful series against the Padres, and as a reward for that was almost murdered on the field. First by Rick Sutcliffe, and then later on by Andre Dawson. And that, if we ever get into the 1987 Cubs, that would be the story of that one. He was chased into the clubhouse and had to be escorted out of the stadium by Chicago police for fear of safety of his own life, and then he had to leave the city that day. Anyway, but back in 1984, he was just John Birch Society, San Diego Padre losing to the Cubs, and he did, and the Cubs beat him. So then the Cubs went to San Francisco, where they proceeded to take 3 out of 4, also very impressive. Sutcliffe won the last game of that trip, and now you're starting to see the real impact. We talked last week about how Sutcliffe in his first couple games had pitched really well, and like a 9-inning, pitched 9 innings in one game. Well, here he had pitched against the Padres 8.1 innings, giving up 1 unearned run. I mean, that's kind of ace stuff. And because the Cubs had been taxing their bullpen so much this year from a lot of short starts by some of their other starters who were no longer in the rotation, it really helped them to have Sutcliffe come in. He threw 7 1/3 in the second game that he pitched. So, he's pitching 2 games on the West Coast, and he's pitching all but 2.1 innings of those 2 games. I mean, that's nice. Lee Smith can come in and throw 2 pitches. That's fine, right? That was sort of where we're at. So the Cubs came back and beat the Padres 3 out of 4. Lee Smith got the save in that game, and as he did in the first game, and the Cubs now had we're on top of the division, and things were looking good. I mean, if you had told me at any time I don't even know if it ever happened, frankly, in my lifetime up until then. But the Cubs are 8-3 on this West Coast road trip, which was fantastic.
Who was the team in the NL East behind the Cubs that was jockeying for that first place position at the time?
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because actually there were a couple teams that were kind of in the mix there. Throughout the course of the season, they would go up and down, but actually the Phillies started off as the team, which is kind of, interesting given the fact that the Cubs had made so many trades with the Phillies. The Cardinals were right there, and the Mets, who would really become sort of the Cubs, I think, not foils, but rivals, later in the season, were also kind of lurking around. So there were 4 teams in the East that year that were all fairly good. So that was something. It's certainly something to keep an eye on, and something that we will talk about as the season progresses here.
Awesome. Always love it. And all season long we'll be chronicling what happened with the 1984 Chicago Cubs, and some administrative housekeeping here on the podcast front. Next week is the Home Run Derby and the All-Star Game. So teams will be on an All-Star break. So we are also going to be on an All-Star break. So we will be off next week, back the week after for the homestand with Arizona and Milwaukee as we head into the trade deadline. So we will be off next week. Enjoy the All-Star break, and we will be back the week after. So make sure you stay subscribed to the podcast. Make sure on your podcatcher platforms, or if you get the video version of the podcast, make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. So when the new episode hits, you'll get your notification, and you'll get that. Go there, give us the likes. We love reading all the comments there. It's great stuff over on our YouTube channel. Search for Wrigleyville Nation Podcast over at YouTube. If you haven't already subscribed, even if you don't want to consume your podcast visually, that's fine. The audio-only versions continue to be subscribed there. But when you subscribe on YouTube, it helps us work the algorithm so other Cub fans can find the show. So it's really helpful to us. We really appreciate it. And continue to like, subscribe, and leave great comments. We love the comments we get over on the audio side as well on the Google Play and the Apple podcast stores as well. So thanks to everyone who supports the show.
The season's really flying, Jeremy. By the time we get back after the All-Star break, not only will we have the 7 games to talk about from this road trip, potentially ill-fated road trip, we'll have 3 games at home against Arizona, and we will be forecasting the future with the last Brewers series of the season, which will be starting shortly thereafter, and then the trade deadline, which will be a week later. So, July is a fast month.
Absolutely. So, we really appreciate everyone sticking with us, and we'll continue to come every single week after next week. So make sure you stay subscribed. And with that, you can, I also want to plug our social medias before we go. Make sure you're following us on all the social media platforms at Wrigleyville Nat. That's the best place to interact with the show. We love to hear from that's X, Threads, Blue Sky, Twitter, Instagram, anywhere you can, all your social media platforms at Wrigleyville Nat. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. We're going to call it a podcast. Pat, any parting shots before we go?
Well, I want everyone to enjoy their All-Star break and take some time off and relax, and we'll see you back afterwards.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.